What we have here is a High Point 995 TS 9mm semi-automatic carbine. We're going to take a detailed look at some of the aspects of operation and performance, shooting characteristics of this thing, and some of the gun's potential problems, with the goal of letting you know what you can expect if you buy one. What are the advantages of this gun? Well, one advantage is I paid $225 for this thing new in the box. It was on sale. That's something that a lot of people consider an advantage, yet it has something of a downside because the economical manner in which this gun was produced might be linked, we could conclude, with some of the issues involved with the gun. We're going to talk about those in detail and talk about how to deal with them and how to overcome them. Another thing this thing has going for it is its reliability. If one pays attention to the magazines and if one pays attention to the ammunition, which we will discuss, you can expect that this gun will operate without malfunctions. It depends on how you handle the thing. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, and occasionally I will state the obvious for the benefit of those who might be novices with firearms. Item 1, shooting. This particular gun is zeroed at 35 yards, which means if you aim at a dot on a target at 35 yards, the bullet will impact where the sights are lined up on that dot. Sighted this way, the gun essentially shoots flat out to about 75 yards with hardly an inch of variance in elevation, which is, of course, up or down. That is what this gun does with 115 grain bullets. If I use heavier bullets, there's more bullet drop over distance. One distinguishing characteristic of this gun is its elevated sight, which is more than 2 inches above the bore. This means if you shoot at a paper bullseye 2 yards away, the bullet will impact or hit lower than where the sights are lined up by that same distance. This is worth discussing a little bit because this gun design and the 9mm round suggests both close and longer range shooting. This particular gun, the way it's sighted, will hit 1.5 or 1.5 inches low at 10 yards. That's a consequence of zeroing it in at 35 yards. Anyone who owns a gun with an elevated sight is going to have to make a decision about selecting the closest range at which the bullet impact will match the sight view. This decision will affect longer range impact, at least partially because of the elevated sights. For a closer look at how this kind of thing operates, one thing you can do is you can look at an online ballistic calculator at the handloads.org website. This thing will allow you to plug in numbers regarding any specific gun, including the height of the sight above the bore, the caliber, bullet weight, etc., to determine how much the bullet will drop over given ranges. And the link for this you will find below the video. If you really want to know where your gun is hitting at varying ranges, the best thing you can do is find out for yourself. You can buy an expensive gun if you like, but you cannot buy shortcuts if you want to find out where your firearm is doing at longer range accuracy. You have to go out and shoot it. Next, what is the accuracy with this gun? This gun is not a pistol, and it's not a rifle either. If I'm shooting a real rifle, almost any real rifle, I can shoot more accurately than I can with this. But it's also true that with this, I can shoot better than I can with any pistol. You can probably do better with this gun than I can because I wear bifocals, which can interfere with my clear view of the sights. But with this thing, I have more than once shot about a 5-inch group at 50 yards and about an 8-inch group at 75 yards, and that's holding dead on the target. Now, I have to admit that when I shot at 100 yards, everything pretty much went to hell. In my hands, this thing is a 75-yard maximum gun, and at 100 yards, I'm just not going to hit with any consistency. Now, you might tell me that 100 yards you can do a lot better, and because of my vision issue that I mentioned earlier, I am certain I will immediately agree with you. After I fired this gun quite a bit with iron sights, I installed the red dot sight that you see on it now. This helps you get on target very quickly. It does help you with shorter range accuracy. However, since the red dot uses no magnification, it doesn't really give me any improvement at longer ranges. This particular red dot is a TMS mini micro red dot sight. It is sitting on a UTG low profile riser mount with 2 slots. I selected this red dot because it is short. I had to use a short red dot because I have a limited amount of space on the rail in front of the iron sights. The iron sights have a quite long sight rail protector. Why is it this long? I do not know. That certainly affected the choice I made. Now, the low profile riser mount was used so that you could look through the red dot and see over the sights and have a clearer field of view. This one is mounted so that the top stock switch, which is here, will open completely without hitting the red dot sight. This switch has to be opened to disassemble the gun. If the red dot is not positioned this way, you would have to remove the red dot in order to disassemble the gun, and you might lose your 0 when you do that. Correction, you almost certainly will lose your 0 when you do that, and afterward you'll have to sight the red dot in again. The rail is polymer, it's not metal. You're not going to be able to take it off and put it back on and keep your 0. Also, the polymer rail is a bit squishy. It's not quite as solid as aluminum. It's possible to get some movement when the red dot is clamped onto the rail. This can be minimized by filing the very edges of the rail with a nail file, lowering what is essentially a thin seam of poly material on each side left when they molded the thing. We're talking about removing a small amount of material, and something as simple as a nail file will do it, and you don't have to remove very much of the polymer. I left the iron sights on as a backup. I can see the front blade through the red dot, but it does not interfere with the function, visibility, or use of the red dot. There is such a thing that many of you experienced shooters will know that is called co-witnessing, which is to say you can line up the iron sights while looking through the red dot, and you can use the dot if you like, or you can use the iron sights if you like. That cannot be accomplished with this because of the issues of dealing with that long rear sight guard and the sizes of red dots available. If you have a short red dot, you're going to find the diameter of the scope is on the small side. The next item is what I think is clearly the worst thing about this firearm, and that is the trigger. This trigger has a long creep to it before it drops the firing pin, and it has to move 3/16 of an inch from its resting position in order to fire. I have seen worse triggers. For example, on a Mosin Nagant Russian rifle. I have one, carbine technically. That trigger has to move a full 1/4 of an inch to fire. Yet we can pause and remind ourselves that everybody seems to love Mosin Nagants, and maybe this won't be a problem for most people. Often when you buy a gun, you're in a gun store, you have no idea what the trigger's like, and you're not going to find out what the trigger's like until you get it home because they don't want you to dry fire the gun. They might have trigger locks on the gun, and the only way you can deal with this in a retail situation is possibly rent the model and shoot it at an indoor range. I didn't know what this trigger was like till I got it home, so I was stuck with figuring out a way to learn to live with it. Apparently, I should have figured out earlier how to live with the Mosin trigger. One thing that helped me come to terms with this trigger was using dummy ammunition or snap caps. That, as you see here, is what appears at first glance to be a bullet round, but it's really not. It's a solid piece of metal and it cannot fire. It contains a plastic buffer where the primer is so it can withstand the impact of the firing pin without damaging the gun. Yet it has the same diameter as the real round, and you can use it to practice with. You can use this thing to practice the trigger pull. You can use this thing to practice loading magazines. You can use it to practice aiming, working the operating handle, working the safety, and they're mighty handy to have. Basically what I did was load it with these dummy rounds and experimented with the trigger. Next item is the controls on the gun. I can tell you this pretty quickly. I shoot right-handed. The magazine release I activate with my thumb. It's easy for me to reach. It's easy for me to use. It's easy for me to find without looking at it. Ditto the safety. The safety is pretty quiet when you move it. You might like that. You might find it an advantage. The operating handle is on the left. It moves pretty freely, about the first 80 or 90% of its motion, but in the last fraction of an inch in which it has to move, it gets very stiff. And you cannot chamber around until you pull it past that stiff spot. You can pull the bolt to a hold open position using the rod by pushing it to the right and hauling it back simultaneously, thus catching the loose circular collar around the operating handle on the round opening here in the back. This is going to be a problem for smaller and lighter shooters who may not have the hand strength to work this thing. One option for activating the operating handle and charging the gun is to point it downrange with the butt against your shoulder or the upper right hand of your chest if you're right-handed. Rotate the thing 90 degrees left with the pistol grip out to the right and the charging handle pointing down. If you are right-handed, you can use your right-handed to work the handle in this position, and the leverage is much improved. The same thing can be said of pulling it into the hold open position. There is another pistol caliber carbine, the Kel-Tec Sub 2000, and that gun also has a very similar problem with the stiff charging handle. There is one other 9mm carbine, the Beretta Storm, which has an operating handle that is very easy to use, and it costs a lot more than the Kel-Tec or Hi-Point. Next, recoil. This gun doesn't have very much recoil. It does have a recoil pad that will compress slightly when firing. I don't know if this pad is necessary at all, but it certainly doesn't hurt anything, and it causes me no problems. A recoil buffer like this might be a comforting psychological factor for novices or smaller frame people who don't weigh more than 100 pounds or so, who might be afraid of recoil. Our next topic is a big one when it comes to the operation of this gun: the magazines and the ammunition. This gun comes with 10 round factory magazines. Many people are going to wish they had greater magazine capacity. ProMag makes aftermarket 15 round magazines. Many people have complained that the older model of these magazines just didn't want to work. My magazines, which you see here, were purchased online, brand new, June 2011, and they will feed the ammunition with no problem if the gun's user pays attention to what's happening with the magazine. Ammunition for this gun in the magazine has to be at the proper angle inside the magazine to feed correctly. The forward tip of the bullet has to be angled upward. If a round lower down in the magazine is not tipped up in this manner, and it is instead pointed dead on at the front of the magazine at a 90-degree angle, without that upward tip, a jam is very likely. When this happens, the round will look good when you put it on top, but when it moves lower down in the magazine, it will move away from the angle that you want it to be in. In my experience, you can see this problem with a Pro Mag, and you will not see it with a factory mag. The reason, I believe, is the difference in the followers of the magazines, which is to say the little piece that separates the rounds in the magazine from the spring. The factory mags have metal followers, and these followers align the bullets at the correct angle and do so quite solidly. The follower in the Pro Mag magazines give the rounds an angle that is not as steep as that in the factory magazines, and I believe that is the crux of the problem. If I had a high-definition camera, I could show you the difference here, but if you ever get the chance to compare the two, you will see what I mean. And again, for emphasis, with both magazines, the rounds on top look good. What matters is what happens to the rounds when they go down the magazine and more rounds are piled on top. I find that I can still use the Pro Mag magazines effectively if I pay attention to two things. Number one of which is what is happening with the rounds when I'm loading them. There are holes down the side of the magazine, and through these holes you can see the top 10 rounds. If a round further down in the magazine goes out of line, you can very easily detect it with these holes. If that happens, what I tend to do is pull the rounds out and try again. There is one other option. That option is simply to use ammunition that's not very tall. If we compare side by side 115 grain round nose jacketed Remington ammunition versus 115 grain jacketed round nose Blazer ammunition, we will see that the Blazer ammunition is roughly 2 millimeters taller than the Remington. Basically, the Remington is about 27 millimeters, the Blazer 29. I experience fewer problems with these Pro Mag magazines when I use that shorter Remington ammo. I use nothing but round nose jacketed ammunition in this gun. I have tried flat nose jacketed ammunition and had a jam or two, and I have also tried hollow points. I got a buddy that has the same model. He has tried hollow points. Malfunctions are more frequent with hollow points, and it seems that the bigger the hole in the hollow point, the greater the incidence of malfunctions. High Point makes this same gun in .45 caliber, and I have read one account of a person using different types of hollow point ammunition with that gun and not having any serious issues. With this 9mm, I find the only way to get consistent functioning without problems is to use that round nose jacketed ammo. Another issue with this gun is you really have to slap the bottom of the factory magazine to get it to seat correctly. If you push the magazine in so that it's flush with the bottom of the opening, you haven't pushed it in far enough. It has to go in a little more than that. There's an indent right here in front of the pistol grip, which allows you to push the magazine up higher to get it going correctly. If you do not hear a click when the magazine goes in, it is not in far enough. If you do not hear a click when the magazine goes in, you try to chamber around, the bolt's going to slide over top of it and it will not chamber. Keep going until the thing clicks in. This can be an advantage for the new Pro Mags because there's a lot of magazines sticking out of the magazine well, but you still have to smack that sucker until you hear the click. The gun has a hold open device that will keep the bolt open when it fires the last round. Because of the difference in the magazine followers that I have described previously, the factory mag will activate the hold open device consistently. With the Pro Mag magazines, the hold open device may work and it may not. Also here, each Pro Mag has a polymer sleeve on the bottom. You need that polymer sleeve on the magazine to hold the magazine in place. Without it, the magazine will wobble and it probably isn't going to feed right. If you get a magazine and this polymer sleeve is so loose that it wants to fall off, my advice is to put some super glue between the polymer surfaces, shove them together, schlonk the empty mag up into the gun to hold it in place and let it dry overnight, and give it a second application if you have to. Next item, cleaning the gun. High Point says to clean these things every 1,500 to 2,000 rounds. If there's one thing that I think is true of many lower priced guns I have seen, disassembly is a nuisance, it's a pain in the neck, and it takes time to do. That's a general rule, and it certainly applies to this gun. I'm not going to tell you now how to disassemble it because another fellow has done it better than I could. There's a fellow whose handle is Brokor1, which is BROKOR numeral 1, on YouTube, who has a very good video on how to disassemble the gun. I refer you to him. You'll find the link below this video. If you look at the empty brass that ejects from this gun, you will see fouling on the outside of the casing near the open mouth. Because of the way the blowback works on this thing, most of the fouling is going to be on the face of the bolt. What does the face of the bolt lead to? It leads to the channel that holds the firing pin. After I shot this thing about 250 rounds, I took it apart completely, and in the channel that holds the firing pin, the fouling came out in chunks. That seems to be where the dirt really concentrates. I experimented with a couple different ways to clean that out, with a Q-tip, with a folded piece of paper, with a little bore brush. Do whatever turns you on to get it out of there, but that's where your main challenge is with cleaning. Another issue related to cleaning is the charging handle must be removed to disassemble the gun. High Point gives you a little tool to do this with. During shooting, you might see that little handle loosen a little. Keep your tool handy, obviously, and tighten it if that takes place. This gun had a couple of issues when I first took it home, and that's not terribly surprising. I have seen firearms that cost way more than this have problems when they're brand new, things that are loose, things that don't fit right, etc., etc. I'm not sure anybody's immune from quality control issues. High Point, I'm happy to say, has very excellent customer service. The gun is always under warranty, even if you are not the original owner. I have talked to these people. They are courteous. They will help you. They want to help. But if you call, have the gun's serial number handy. When I took this gun out of the box, the front sight was loose. There are Allen screws at the bottom of the sight, right down here. Check yours. If they need to be tightened, tighten them. Also, when I got this gun, the receiver cover fit badly. The holes were misplaced. I removed the receiver cover, this thing right here, and I couldn't get it back on after I removed it because the holes and the pins that hold it together would not align correctly. How they put that thing on in the factory, I can only imagine. I called them, explained the problem, gave them the serial number. They sent me another one, free, very quickly, with the sight assembly on it. And again, it cost me nothing. I understand that some people with this gun have a problem with the magazines jamming when they're trying to insert the magazine. When I first heard of this, I had fired maybe 500 or 600 rounds through this gun without a problem with the magazines, and I was shocked to hear anybody could have this kind of a problem. I had trouble imagining how this situation could happen. I found it very easy to put the magazines in, just slide them in straight, no problem. So, I decided that if other people can make their magazines jam, then darn it, I can make my magazine jam too. So I set out to intentionally make the magazines jam when I was trying to push them in. Finally, after trying to make the thing jam for quite a long time, I finally got it to do it by inserting the thing badly out of line. And by that I mean I was pushing it in at an extreme angle in which the top of the magazine was pushing hard against the back inside of the magazine well. When I did this, whammo, the magazine came to a stop. So the next question is, what the heck is the magazine hitting to cause this? To speed the story up, the situation is that there is a counterweight inside the magazine well. If we look at this photograph, we see the gun disassembled. The arrow points to the counterweight. That's where it is when you take the gun apart. This drawing is a close-up of what that counterweight looks like from the side. There is a notch in it, a 90-degree angle where the arrow is pointed. If the back leading edge of the magazine hits that thing, it is stuck, and you're not going to get it in the gun unless you back off a little and try again. Interesting, thinks me, so I called my friends at High Point and asked them a question. If I filed or sanded the lower edge of this counterweight to create an angle on which the magazine edge would slide off, would it affect the function of the gun? They said, nope. Now, they also explained that they didn't think that loading the mags was going to be a problem, but they conceded it won't affect the function of the gun. I did not think it would affect the function of the gun because the lower end of this counterweight does not interface with or interact with anything else. My next step was to file an angle on the bottom of the counterweight. If you look at this drawing, it shows you basically what it looked like after I did it. Like the path of this arrow, if the edge of the magazine hits this counterweight, it will now glance off. It will not hang up like it did before. It might slow you down a little, but if I push harder, it goes in. If you are thinking of this modification, my advice is do not be in a hurry. I spent 2 hours working on this, and as soon as I got the thing to slide off, that's when I quit. The next time I took this gun to the range, I was shooting that flat-nosed ammo I was talking about earlier. I had a jam, and after that I had a situation in which I put my finger on the trigger and did not feel any tension. Since the thing had jammed before, I thought, maybe it's jammed again. I opened the bolt a little bit, but there was a live round in there. I closed the bolt, then put my finger on the trigger, and everything was normal. And then it happened a second time. At first I thought this was the flat-nosed ammunition, but when I got home I said, hey, wait a minute. Could that counterweight be doing this? That's when I realized I really should have pulled that slide trigger to see if the gun would have gone off. I disassembled the gun and looked at everything that's involved in activating the trigger, and everything seemed to be okay. I lubed it up, put it back together. When I returned to the range, I shot up the rest of the flat-nosed ammo with no problem. I've shot my normal round-nosed ammo since then with no problem. I don't know what that was. It has occurred to me maybe I should buy another counterweight to keep it handy just in case. Who knows? That's it, folks. I could have gone into more detail, but I think that's enough. High Point 995 TS. It's not just a gun, it's an adventure.